You probably haven't had a Chex Mix in a while, but I always eat the pretzels first.
Yeah.
Get those pretzels out of the fucking way.
See, I would save the pretzels for last. Those are my favorite part.
Oh, I want brown bread and the white Chex.
Oh, the brown breads are so good.
Oh, love the brown breads.
No, I don't eat Chex Mix anymore. There's a bunch of shit in that.
Okay, so let's record the intro now.
So what did Milkless? Because I think we start with the name.
Two dads, we love our kids, but then we also need them to know that we're like pretty cool and it's not like a wimpy podcast. So, hey, hey, Milkless.
Hey, welcome. Hey,
Milkless. Call the audience, Milkless. What's up, Milkless? Max coming at you.
What if that's it? That's our first take. On this episode of the podcast, we have Vani Hari, aka DBA the Food Babe. She is a parent, social media personality, and food activist who, along with the Food Babe Army, her 1.5 million followers, have done some pretty amazing work getting large food companies to acknowledge and even change the ingredients in their food. She has at times been a little bit of a lightning rod for controversy, which we will get into in the episode. Oh, also she's a published author 4 times over. Her new cookbook, Food Babe Family, comes out today. Get it where you get books. Here we go.
All right, Matt, today we have a guest. We have Vani Hari, the Food Babe. I cannot believe we have her on here. Super excited because we always talk about food. How do you get your kids to eat? We did one episode on picky eaters. Super excited to have you on here. Matt, what are we going to do today? How do we want to dive in with Vani?
I guess my first question is if you could really kind of boil down the philosophy you bring into food. Like Michael Pollan had his famous eat real food, not too much, mostly plants. And that's kind of like everything can kind of be reduced to that. Do you have some kind of core philosophies that you're bringing into the way you think about things?
Yeah, absolutely. So my philosophy has always been look at the ingredients. The ingredients of what you're eating matters the most. And you need to become an investigator and learn about all of the different ingredients that you put in your body. And you need to find out whether those ingredients are nutritious or are they there to preserve a product so it can stay on a shelf for 9 months? Is it there for an aesthetic reason to make a dead-like product seem alive and colorful, right? Is it there for a flavoring reason to trick your brain into thinking you're eating real food when you're really not? You're eating a lot of processed ingredients. So finding out what ingredients serve the body and what ingredients don't serve the body. That's the same way I've raised my children from very, very little as I've taught them about ingredients.
How old are your kids?
2.5 and 6.5.
Oh, nice. Right in our wheelhouse, right in our range there.
And which is why can I just say how excited I am to meet both of you and to be on this podcast, because I found your podcast randomly on Instagram. And I was like, I have to meet these guys. They are doing something that I wish was available many, many years ago when I started becoming a mother, 6.5 years ago. And I just love hearing a man's perspective on raising children. I just love the fact that I'm here. And I'm so thankful for that. So thank you for having me on.
Oh, thanks for coming. We appreciate it.
Yeah, super pumped to have you on. And we're all about wanting our kids to be healthy. I mean, who wants to put bad shit in your kids' bodies, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like parenting is so damn hard. I'm trying to make sure they go to sleep. And then it's like, oh my God, there's something poisonous that's going on here. So it's like, how do we navigate this world?
My philosophy is that we really have a responsibility as parents, like more so than any other generation that's ever existed. We know more about food and food production and what's actually in food, whereas our parents and their parents' parents didn't really understand what was happening to our food supply. My parents just didn't know any better. They were immigrant Indian parents that came to America. They wanted us to live like Americans, and like everyone's eating candy at the movie theaters. Everyone's, doing this and that, and they're eating Betty Crocker and Hamburger Helper, and we're going to do that too. And that's what I grew up on. And now we can create like the next generation of the best eaters and the people that could be the healthiest instead of the unhealthiest, which is now the projection of where kids are headed today.
Wouldn't there people say, oh, well, it's the FDA. It's the aren't they keeping us safe? Like they wouldn't allow.
Yeah, I'll give you a few examples of how the FDA is completely asleep at the wheel. First of all, they just admitted in the last 10 years that they don't even have the capability to test and regulate the amount of food chemicals that have been approved for use. because a lot of people think that the FDA has these fancy laboratories and all these scientists and doctors working there that like look at these food chemicals and make sure that they don't like kill rats or cause any problems with animals. And like, you would think they would have all of this kind of, infrastructure available, but they don't. They actually only have the data that's produced by the companies creating these products to begin with.
Yeah, we did a fair amount of work to try to do a documentary series on the pharmaceutical industry and learn the same thing about the FDA. I remember being shocked that like, wait, so the FDA doesn't do testing?
Yeah.
Somebody makes a drug and then they test the drug and then they give the results to the FDA who looks at it. And ultimately our series about the pharma industry never got off the ground because we were told that no one would carry it.
It's that simple. For example, trans fats were approved for use, partially hydrogenated oils, for the longest time. They were linked to 20,000 heart attacks a year, over 7,000 deaths every single year. 7,000 people were dying. They could link back to these trans fats for years and years and years and years. And it took someone suing the FDA to get them regulated and banned. And then, another 3 to 5 years to enact that policy. So then things like, let me tell you one more example of how ludicrous and crazy. There was a chemical in red number 3 dye that was linked to cancer in animal studies. And so they banned it in cosmetics. However, the maraschino cherry industry that is highly reliant upon all of the alcohol industry, because that's what they put in those fancy drinks in bars, said, well, that red number 3 is what makes our red cherry so bright and amazing. We need to lobby the FDA to still allow it in food.
Shirley Temples. Come on, Shirley Temples.
Yeah, exactly. Shirley Temples. Red number 3 is still allowed in food, but you can't have it on your lipstick. And so this is the kind of environment we're living in terms of regulation of food additives, and why it's important for regular, everyday citizens like ourselves, parents, need to go out and learn the truth about what's happened to our food.
So, I think one of the things that is tricky for me, just as a parent, we have more information about everything than we ever have before. And honestly, we have more kind of information than we can even act on a day-to-day basis as a parent. And it's like these institutions that were built to take care of us, like the FDA. I think there's been a real loss of faith in those. As a parent, I find myself feeling like, gosh, who do I trust? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And how much am I really going to go out and learn what every ingredient is on the back of these things? Because like I got a job and I got, like all this shit.
Well, yeah. And this is exactly why I started Food Babe back in the day, was to teach everyone kind of what I was learning and then give them the practical kind of tools on how to implement this. Because again, our number one responsibility as parents, would we agree that it's like to keep them safe, right? Like that's our number one thing. And then there's just like thing going around, which is just driving me crazy, that like we can't call any foods bad, right? Because like we may cause an eating disorder, or we may, create this in our child. I don't believe that's true. I think those things are caused by other situations that happen within an individual. I think what we have the obligation to do is to actually tell them what is food and what is not food, right? Artificial dyes and these other things I've talked about, those are not food, right? Those are serving one purpose, and that is to improve the bottom line of the food industry.
Yeah. On the one hand, I'm like, oh my God, she's so right. And on the other hand, I'm like, I don't want to fucking do any of that. Because it's like, because I'm like, honestly, I'm like, shit. But then I'm also kind of feeling like, okay, look, and you look at some of these studies, the way I'm trying to kind of look at it as a parent is like being fully aware of everything you're saying, all the stuff on foodbabe.com, and just know that like, okay, these studies have been linked to increased X, Y, and Z, rashes on kids, increased cancer incidence rate in mice. Maybe instead of 0.001% chance of cancer, 0.004% chance of cancer, 4x cancer rate. Still very low, but just being aware that like shit ain't good. Personally, like if we're doing Santa Claus's lap and he gives a candy cane, I'm going to let him have the candy cane. That red is so damn bright in that candy cane. I know it's red 3.
So this is where I would come in. And I don't ever have my Food Babe pants down, right? So I would like anticipate that I'm going to see Santa Claus, and I would throw in a Yum Earth candy cane in my backpack. Mm-hmm. and I would just switch it out. And so like, that's where like we can have strategies on how to like live in this process world, but you're not going to always know to prepare in advance. And again, there's so many parenting challenges and life challenges. You're not going to be able to prepare for every circumstance. And there are going to be those circumstances where your child eats red 40.
Right.
But think about the other 90% of the time where you were mindful.
Right.
So Halloween's coming up, right? And one of the things that I talk about is the switch witch. I don't know if you guys know about the switch witch, but
No.
she comes and she takes all the candy away and she brings toys instead. And so she'll leave like the box of raisins, like your old neighbor that gives those, like our neighbor who's 90, she gives box of raisins. And then a couple neighbors are like in with, they shouldn't buy dyes, but like most of them.
Well, because they're your neighbors.
Yeah.
You better watch out.
Got him.
No, but most of my neighbors serve crap. Okay. And I've gifted them all my books. I've done as much as I can. You know, you can't reach everybody, right? Even if you live right next door to them.
Yeah.
So, you know, the switch witch takes away the old candy, and at the door is new toys. And it's like Christmas morning for them. And they're just so happy and so excited. And they could care less about that toxic candy.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Do you ever, I mean, within the way of eating that you've constructed, you still get to eat tasty stuff like ice cream, pizza, you said.
Everything.
But do you ever just cheat and punt on like, okay, we're just going to eat this one and then not worry about it?
If I have a kryptonite, it's a donut. Like, I love a donut. I would never buy a Krispy Kreme donut. I would never buy Dunkin' Donut based on the ingredients that they put in their food. But I will eat a donut from a real bakery. And I have a little old bakery that's just down the street. But they fry their stuff, I'm talking in the worst possible oil. And occasionally I will eat a couple of donut holes. Okay. Because it's like my childhood favorite, but I know what I'm doing and it's driving me crazy and I'm pissed off about it when I'm doing it. Okay.
Yeah, I know. It's funny because I grew up similarly to you. I mean, in any 2-week period, I had probably had Blue's Craft Macaroni and Cheese, Domino's Pizza, and Burger King. And my parents were both attorneys. They were like educated. We knew all the benefits at that point of this mass production of food. We didn't know yet what it was doing to us, or we didn't widely know it.
Right.
So I have similar, like, people who are like, oh, Coke's just too sweet. I'm like, no, Coke tastes good.
Coke is so good.
It's amazing. And now I have like probably 2 a month. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, look, I know this is awful, but I used to drink them. I drank them every day for my entire childhood.
Me too.
I have trouble being dogmatic about stuff, but it's like when you have the information, you got to at least move the needle in the right direction.
Yeah. And it's not about not having treats in life, right? Like we're still a family that eats croissants and ice cream and pizza and like all of it. But we're just making sure we're eating really good ingredients as opposed to the artificial ones that I know that can wreak havoc on people's health, because it did mine. I was so sick for most of my life, and I know what it feels like to be hopped up on all of that kind of food. That's just something I don't want to wish for my children. And like the common ground that I've found that actually fits every single diet lifestyle is real food. Literally going back to real food is 90% of the answer. And then the other 10% is like figuring out what works for your body.
Yeah. It's back to Michael Pollan. Eat real food, not too much, mostly plants.
Yeah, he was right.
But with that said, like I am stressed out about just the thought of like another thing that parents have to do. So then your cookbook hits some of it. Maybe you have some tips, like instead of like to Matt saying, not being like dogmatic, like just eat whole foods. What are some like little tips and tricks that like make it easier?
So some of my favorite things that I've figured out for my life is like, you have to make foods in advance as much as possible. And so like one thing that I do every single night is in my little stainless steel slow cooker, I throw in half a cup of sprouted oats that are also glyphosate free, which is amazing. And I throw them in there with water. It takes less than 30 seconds. And so first thing in the morning, like oatmeal's already ready. Pour it in a bowl, add fruit, whatever on top. Here you go. Eat that while I make your lunch for school, or like do whatever.
Can you sex it up with honey, or is that not allowed?
You can, of course.
Okay,
like
good.
Honey's great. Like, so if I were to think of like any approved sweetener, it would be honey, maple syrup, dates. Like those are great. And for this cookbook, it was all easy stuff for families on how they can sit together and eat the same food. Like there's nothing more irritating than having to be a short order cook and make like 4 different things for every single meal because everybody's taste is different. And one way I help my kids have choice in that meal is I'll always make like 2 or 3 vegetables. So they can choose which vegetables they want as part of their meal. Like they're not going to have like, the stagnant same old, peas every single meal.
Do you ever deal with like straight up rejection of food from your kids?
Oh, absolutely. I think my son has been the most vocal about that. There was a time period where I was really frustrated because at home, he would eat every vegetable under the sun. But then when we would travel and another chef or like, the hotel resort or whatever would make it, or I would tell them, hey, can you steam some vegetables and put a little butter and salt or whatever on it? They wouldn't steam it to the right consistency.
Texture's big.
Didn't have enough butter in it. And so like the next vacation we were at a restaurant and I just said, hey, we're going to have pizza, but I ordered the broccoli and that's coming first and everyone's going to eat their broccoli and then we're going to have our pizza. And he looked at me and he ate his broccoli. And I was like, oh, he's listening to me. Like, this is awesome. I thought he was going to push back. And it's because I set the expectation as a parent.
Especially if they like that vegetable, if you just kind of wait and then they'll kind of, oh, that's pretty good. And then before they know it, but if you put it all on the plate at the same time,
no, you can't.
It's too good.
No, you have to serve the vegetables first. So like, that's one of the main rules in my book that we still do as a family. We eat in courses. So our first course is always a salad or vegetable, always. And actually there's science to prove that when the humans eat their vegetables first, it actually regulates your blood sugar better. So when you do have the carbohydrate food later on in the meal, your blood sugar isn't spiked as much. So it's great for our kids to have that idea that we should eat our vegetables first.
Yeah, it's also a good tactic to kind of save the best for last.
Yeah,
I mean, you probably haven't had a Chex Mix in a while, but I always eat the pretzels first.
Yeah.
Get those pretzels out of the fucking way.
See, I would save the pretzels for last. Those are my favorite part.
Oh, I want brown bread and the white Chex.
Oh, the brown breads are so good.
Oh, love the brown breads.
No, I don't eat Chex Mix anymore. There's a bunch of shit in that.
Yeah, I know there is. Oh, especially that Zesty Bold.
Oh,
know that Zesty Bold black
it's
Chex Mix.
It's totally MSG.
Oh, just trick my taste buds. I love it.
So MSG is an interesting thing. And I actually feel like GMO is another where you've kind of gone toe to toe with folks who say, look, we can't just universally across the board say that these things are bad. And that's another thing where as a parent who is not a food expert, I get into feeling like, well, who am I supposed to listen to?
Yeah. So this is where you need to learn and teach yourself the truth about this, right? Like look into see what a GMO is. It's created to withstand heavy doses of a chemical pesticide called Roundup. And you've got to just use your common sense, right?
But so here's the thing, those are not cool because also then, there's been reports of increased amount of Roundup in runoff water. So that's not good, right?
Yeah.
I would probably agree with you on that one. But then there's other ones where they can fortify stuff and just the whole category of GMO is just scientists messing with the DNA.
The problem that I have with GMOs is the combination with the chemical.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of MSG, your other question, I say, again, look up how they feed rats who they want to study the obesity epidemic. Look up what they feed to rats to make them fat. What do they feed them? MSG, because it makes them eat more than they should. Now, we're in this situation where the majority of Americans are overweight. And you're going to say that MSG is okay to be in our food? Absolutely not, because what it does is it tricks your brain into remembering that flavor, hijacking your taste buds, making you eat more than you should. And so when I think about the different additives that do this kind of hijacking, there's a lot of them, not just MSG. It's natural flavor, artificial flavor. Then you've got autolyzed yeast extract. And you have all of these different things working in conjunction to make your mouth water.
Yeah, but in a way though, MSG, it's kind of isn't it kind of like sugar and salt? It's just if it's not causing cancer and it's just tricking people into eating a lot more, it's kind of by vilifying it so much, isn't sugar also just an epidemic as well?
Sugar is not bad. Sugar would be nothing without the flavor. For example, if I gave you a cup of water with sugar in it, would that be appealing to you?
Maybe with some Red 40 in there.
Throw a little Red 40 in there, little Doritos dust.
Some simple syrup. Would that even turn you on at all?
No.
Not at all,
Yeah.
right? So it's not the sugar, it's the sugar plus the flavoring, right? They're taking, so when MSG is like a naturally occurring additive, right? It's in tomatoes, like it's in a lot of stuff, right? The problem is when you extract that and add it to a food. And it's the same thing happening with natural flavor. They're taking the 1 millionth best part of a blueberry. And so when someone eats a Nutri-Grain bar that's just processed crap, they think they're eating blueberries when there's no blueberries in it. It's like dyed apple pieces.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Nutri-Grain bars. There's this whole kind of new wave of food products that are produced in mass that promote themselves as being really healthy. Not to pick on anybody, but thinking about like Annie's macaroni and cheese, or like those RX bars, because they say what they have in them on the front. I started.
No. RX bar is one of the companies that absolutely is a liar.
Yeah, I started reading about what was actually in them, and I kind of stopped buying them.
Yeah.
But to what extent do you think that those kinds of foods have actually gotten healthier versus they've just gotten better at marketing them as healthy?
I think it's both. So, a lot of the huge conglomerates, the General Mills of the world, the Kellogg's, Kraft, etc., have realized that there is this wave of people that want better for you foods that are also packaged and processed. And so they're starting to make better products, or they're starting to buy the companies that are making better products. Like, for example, Annie's was bought by General Mills for $800 million shortly after I started a petition to take on Kraft macaroni and cheese. It got over 350,000 signatures, and Kraft eventually had to remove artificial dyes from their mac and cheese because their competitor, Annie's, got tons of business after that made worldwide news. And then, of course, General Mills is like, oh, I'm going to buy Annie's because this is a great opportunity to expand into this market. And now they've taken the Annie's brand, and they're making all kinds of crazy products with the Annie's label, right? Stuff that the original Annie's makers would never make, like Annie's yogurt that doesn't, like, it's just mostly sugar. And so people think they're getting the Annie's quality, but they're not. When I think about what you buy at the grocery store as a mom, as a parent, as a dad, you want to look at the ingredient label no matter what. And you want to make sure you're not letting your kids eat a ton of natural flavors, because natural flavors, again, are going to trick their brains into thinking some food tastes better than it should. And they're going to want that snack. When you're eating mostly real food, you're getting so many different flavor components every single time you eat real food. For example, a blueberry one day could be extra tart. The next day it's sweet. Next day it could be juicy and plump. It's different every single time. But if you're used to eating processed packaged goods, and you're going to be more of a picky eater, because that processed packaged food is the same damn thing every single time. That's why the McDonald's hamburger is the exact same thing every single time, and the Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich and all of that stuff, right? It's all the same every single time. So, to come off of that and to detox from that and to go to real food ends up actually being kind of difficult.
Yeah, so you feel like a lot of kids picking this, because I have read that idea that like part of the challenge of getting kids to eat real food is that a blueberry will sometimes taste amazingly sweet and other times be tart or bitter or whatever, whereas a goldfish is a goldfish is a goldfish.
Yeah.
But you feel like if they're never having the goldfish, then they're not as picky about the blueberry.
Yeah, absolutely. The majority of kids' diets needs to be real food. And then there's times to have those fun packaged foods, and there's tons of great brands out there, but it's like, I wanted parents to know that they don't have to resort to goldfish. There's so many awesome new snacks available that aren't like the typical sugary bullshit snacks of the past. Mm. They make these amazing wild salmon jerkies. Epic Foods makes these
Epic's legit. I think they're based in Austin.
Yeah, you're giving wild salmon in a jerky form, and they add a little maple syrup to it, so it's a little bit sweet, and kids love this. It's chewy. It's like eating a fruit roll-up, but it's wild salmon.
So it doesn't have to be hard.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be hard.
I think that's where my brain immediately goes. Is
right.
You have the Food Babe Army. We're more like the milkless maybes, and so our audience is we're interested in this. We like this. We like the way this sounds. It sounds healthy. It sounds like it's good for our kids. This is something that maybe we can get behind. but it's kind of like, seems like a lot of commitment.
Wouldn't you like to opt out of this system? Like, wouldn't you like to say that I'm stronger than these assholes and that try to take over my body all the time? And I want people to feel like they're not alone in this thinking, and that there's a whole community out there, an army. I call them the Food Babe Army. Like, people not only caring about like what they're eating, but they're willing to like go educate and teach other people the truth about what they're eating, right?
I do want to ask you, because you've alluded to it a couple of times with the Food Babe Army and some of the work you've done against, Subway and Kellogg. And I mean, impressive stuff.
Amazing stuff, like BHT removed from General Mills and Kellogg.
Yeah.
Kraft removing Yellow 5, just like insane shit.
Yeah. Corporations of that size don't often move for individual people or for kind of grassroots movement like that. But you got some like blowback. And there was a series of, articles, and, some of that, you go after big companies, you expect to catch some heat from somewhere because they are protecting their interests. But was there any part of that felt like more well-intentioned or more the beginning of a conversation about making sure that there's the right amount of nuance or that we're not fear-mongering? Like, is there anything that changed about your approach since kind of going through what I'm sure was a really hard time of like people kind of attacking what you were doing?
Yeah. So let me just tell you a little background story. So it was right after I had gotten Miller Coors and Anheuser-Busch to release the ingredients in beer for the first time in history. And when that happened, I swear, like, it was headline news everywhere.
Wild.
The food industry was going berserk. And at that same time, I was doing a huge campaign to get non-organic milk out of Starbucks, because we were calling it Monsanto milk because they were serving like GMO milk to everybody. And Monsanto could not stand that. Like, they were just so livid about that. So they created an entire group that was called Leave No Comment Behind. So whenever somebody would say something positive about the work that I was doing or what I was highlighting, they would do whatever they could to bring down my character. They would call me all sorts of names. They would say I was pseudoscientific, I was fear-mongering, all of this stuff. These people were actually being paid by Monsanto. It was insane. Like, I had to have security. It was very tough.
So what's interesting is through your activism and your social profiles, your language is very careful. These additives may cause things in certain studies. These have been linked to X, Y, and Z. Look, I want to go whole food, but I'm also going to read this and it's not going to freak me the F out too much because I'm like, okay, let me check out this study. Okay, so there were some rats and it did increase cancer incidence rate, but it's small. I would love if the Food Babe continued on her mission and got those out of that food. But if I have one of those foods, I don't freak out. Some people may take that and not understand the nuance that, like, look, it doesn't need to then go into a level of anxiety. And so how do we hold those in our brain?
At the same time, yeah. And I don't think anyone needs to lose their shit. I think it's about a healthy balance in terms of when you're out and about and things happen, like, yeah, you got to give yourself grace.
Yeah.
This is something that I think about with what we're doing too, is that so much of social media is driven by things that scare people or make people mad. That's so much the fuel of the space. And for us, a lot of our posts that perform the best are you having this problem? Well, here's a solution. But often that's a little reductive, and there's not usually one solution. And it's not one thing that's going to work for every family and every kid. And so I think that's something that Max and I are thinking about a lot. How do we impart information and try to draw people to this podcast that we believe in, but also be clear about the fact that we are not early childhood development specialists? And I just think there's a lot of shit out there that scares people on the internet, on the social internet particularly. And I'm wary of adding to that.
And I don't think you should be. Like, I think you should just tell it like it is. I mean, the thing that attracted me to your podcast was the fact that y'all just talk like it is. And so it was just like, it was this beautiful conversation between two dads that, like, I wasn't getting anywhere else. when I think about people coming over to the Food Babe Instagram page, it's not to like scare you by any means. Like I'm not presenting the information in a scary way. I'm presenting it in like, here are the facts about these additives. Here's the facts about these ingredients. Here's a product that tastes almost like X product, and this one has this many ingredients, and this one has like 5 ingredients. Which one would you choose, right? Like it comes back to like, what's our number one responsibility as a parent? To keep our kids safe.
I think it's a fascinating thing that has happened as more and more people have been able to access a microphone, right? Like it used to be very, very, very few people had a mic. And I think this has happened in news and nutrition in all these different spaces where there are people coming along saying like, hey, I think the way we've been looking at this is really messed up. And the attack on those people is like, oh, well, you don't have the scientific background, you don't have all the facts, and you're just one person and this is dangerous. And then the attack against the establishment is like, well, but you're a part of this system that pretty clearly isn't like taking very good care of people. And I think that conversation is one that we have to learn to navigate on a very broad scale in a bunch of different disciplines so that we can like read the news in an informed way and make informed health decisions and food decisions about our kids. You have been a really interesting example of this where like they came after you for not having a background as a PhD in nutrition and for like oversimplifying like certain ideas. And then your response to them was always like, yeah, but you're part of this thing. And I'm just interested to see how that conversation plays out.
Yeah, nobody's keeping these guys in check.
Right.
And that's part of the problem is like, I think about Kellogg's, for example. Kellogg's in 2015 said they were going to remove artificial dyes from their cereals. Nobody's following up with them and making them do that. They said they would do it by 3 years. Now it's been 8 years and they still haven't done it. Instead, they're creating new cereals with artificial food dyes that are more hip to kids today, like Baby Shark and Unicorn. So these food companies are completely like, it's like a wild west out there. They just do whatever they want. They say whatever they want to get good publicity, and then they don't do it. I mean, General Mills took artificial dyes out of Trix and then put them back.
Yeah.
And like, I think about like, the fact that I don't have a nutrition degree, that I'm not a PhD, that I'm not a scientist or a doctor. And it's like, food is really simple. Just stick to whole nutritious foods. And like, there are risks associated with these unknown kind of chemicals that we're putting in our body. Like we're one big experiment and like, we know what works. Like, why not go back to that?
No, like, and I respect you for how driven you are on this mission. Like you're committed to this and you're raising awareness around this. And even, this is what's kind of weird. Even if only one of the additives got taken out and saved one person's life, it's like, what's the alternative? It's like, are we really like that bummed out about not eating yellow 5 or whatever?
It tastes exactly the same. So like
I
did on live TV, I took the UK version of mac and cheese and the United States version, and I did a side-by-side comparison on the streets of Chicago, right in front of like Kraft's headquarters, like, and it tastes the same.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's there for an aesthetic purpose. It's there to make them money because it's cheaper for them to put petroleum-based dyes made from like crude oil than real food.
Yeah.
Because why? Because real food breaks down in a box and it has a lesser shelf life.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, like Max said, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find people who would argue food companies clearly do not have our best interests as their first priority. And real whole foods are kind of a proven model. So I think that like, the foundations of everything you're doing and like really the fact that you've been able to move the needle as much as you have just as a private citizen ultimately is like really impressive. I think it's interesting intellectually to talk about the tactics. Like how do we inform people without scaring them? How do you get something to go viral without cheapening it or oversimplifying it? Is there a conversation to be had once you've accepted all those facts that these institutions aren't really looking out for us? About like, okay, well, this chemical we know is bad. This one maybe has this benefit. So I think there's like, I just always like am looking for nuance in things. And I hope we're not like poking or pushing too hard. I'm just interested.
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
No, this is great. This is great. No, I appreciate the prodding.
I can't like the people who are just like anti-science drive me crazy because then they like whip out their phone and I'm like, it's a pretty sciencey phone. I believe that like we need to have some kind of trust in the scientific community, but also large pieces of the scientific community have not earned that trust from us. So I think it's just a sticky, challenging problem.
And I mean, how many times, I can count also how many times science has been wrong, right?
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's part of the scientific process is being wrong until you're right.
Tobacco is great for pregnant women. Doctors recommending that. Like, you've seen the old school ads, I hope. Like, it's crazy what was considered safe and then later on found out to be very dangerous and cause deaths.
Yeah, but you also have people not doing things because they think they're not safe. And that can be dangerous.
I think avoiding all processed food would never be dangerous.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Unless you're like stuck on a mountain and you're about to die and you need something to eat, right?
Then you eat that bag of Doritos, yeah.
Right, you eat the bag of Doritos.
On the side of the mountain. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, staying away from processed food is pretty safe.
I don't think there's any downside to that. There's zero downside to that.
Yeah.
So I know that there's red 40 in nacho cheese Doritos. What about Cool Ranch?
I think there's yellow 5 and yellow 6 in there. Yeah.
I guarantee you there's no Dorito that is not
and they make organic Doritos now. So your life's not over. Go buy the organic Doritos.
Yeah, of course.